The theme of our presentation is mainly about the impact of leadership consistency on organizational performance and strategy implementation. In most organizations, the level of leadership is often multi-level rather than single. For leaders at different levels, different people have different opinions on whether leaders play a decision-making role in the organization. The author of this article mainly discusses the different roles played by senior leaders and subordinate leaders when the organization implements new strategic measures. The author takes the leadership of a large healthcare company as a research object and makes assumptions about two possibilities that affect the implementation of the new strategy. Our presentation will focus on the author's research and findings. In general, taking large medical institutions as a research object, this paper discusses two hypotheses affecting employee performance. One is that the focus leaders affect employee performance, but the comprehensive impact of leaders at all levels on employee performance. Finally, the research shows that the factors affecting employee performance in the reform of the strategy mainly depend on the consistency of cross-level leaders. Though the impact of leadership consistency on the effective implementation of strategy in medical institutions. This paper is related to the theme of the impact of leadership ability on employee performance. Because the more effective the strategy implementation is, the better the employees ensure the implementation of strategy, which is related to the role played by leaders at all levels, which belongs to the scope of enterprise strategic accounting. In strategic accounting, only by giving full play to the role of leadership to the greatest extent can we help enterprise leaders and employees complete and realize the strategy. The research of this paper helps us to better consider and measure the role of leadership from the perspective of strategy accounting. However, the research of this paper mainly focuses on medical institutions, and the number of the research objectives is relatively small, which is not full representative. Therefore, the research on this issue still needs to conduct in-depth research on different research objects in other industries to ensure the reliability and representativeness of data.
The article mainly discusses how leadership influences employee performance. It focuses on how the consistency and effectiveness of leadership across hierarchical levels influence the implementation of the strategic initiative. Found that only when leaders' effectiveness at different levels was considered in the aggregate that significant performance improvement occurred. To implement a new strategic initiative, leaders must allocate resources and convince employees that the new initiative is important and in the employees' interests to support. A key determinant of implementing a strategic initiative is whether lower-level leaders support the change. If performance is to be gained from strategic change, senior and subordinate leaders need to effectively communicate the strategy and take actions to ensure its implementation. The ability of senior leaders to implement strategic initiatives can be heavily dependent on the alignment of organizational leaders across hierarchical levels. An isolated senior leader will not have much effect, and alignment or misalignment of leaders across hierarchical levels can enhance or weaken the successful implementation of strategic initiatives. Two hypotheses are presented in the article. The first hypothesis is that any focal leader can influence performance. Or more formally, this is the conventional expectation. The higher a department perceives that its leader supports a new strategy, the stronger the likelihood that the new strategy will be implemented in that department, resulting in increases in strategically relevant organizational performance. The second hypothesis is that matters is the aggregate effects of leadership across levels. This reflects the author's expectations. The more department members perceive that leaders aggregated across hierarchical levels support a new strategy, the stronger the likelihood that the new strategy will be implemented, resulting in increases in strategically relevant organizational performance in that department. The article investigated the relation between leadership alignment and strategy implementation, and test hypotheses through the results showing by implementing a new strategy in a large healthcare organization. This healthcare organization provides comprehensive healthcare to well over 1 million plan members. A new CEO has been elected, and its competitive market has changed. So this organization has decided to implement a new strategy in order to confront other new healthcare organizations. The overall goal of this organization's new strategic change is to magnificently improve patient satisfaction, which is a key indicator of the success of the new strategy. The implementation of the new strategy is divided into two phases. The first phase is focused primarily on articulating the new strategy and allocating tangible resources to support the change. The second phase, the emphasis was on changing the nature of the interaction between patients and their physicians.
The method used by the author, which comes from the levels issues in theory, development, data collection, and analysis by Klein, Dansereau, and Hall in 1994. There are 330 physicians participated in the study by completing the survey, which only 53% of them provided a complete survey. Finally, after screening, get the survey data of 280 people from 40 different medical departments. 2001 and 2003 are 2 time points mentioned in this article. The focus of the article is to be interested in the role of leadership in capturing gains from a change in strategy. So the patient's ratings of access to survey as dependent variables. Independent variables are the reason of the change of dependent variables. There are two main parts of independent variables. Leaders' effectiveness, leaders' support of the new strategic initiative, and aggregating individual response. The first part studies the leader's support for the new strategy. There are 6 projects in total which are scored by using the method of 7-point Likert score. Second part is using RWG on the row item scores to get the appropriation of aggregation of the leadership and support. Control variables refer to the factors that affect dependent variables in addition to independent variables. There are 4 control variables: group size, individuals' tenures, 2001 patient global access rating scores, and the employees' support for the strategic. Then standardize this variable before including it as a control variable in the regressions analysis used to test the hypothesis. Finally, in the analysis, address the mean level nature of these phenomena statistically by using HLM. In conclusion, first examine variability within centers, looking at how departments varied in their patient satisfaction scores. Second, examine variability between centers. The separation of between center and within center. Between department variability made possible by using HLM controls for the effects of unobserved heterogeneity that may affect patient satisfaction score difference across centers. In the end, standardize independent variables to facilitate interpreting results. This page is an overview of the main argument and the evidence provided. In fact, the author used the 3-variable method to obtain statistical data to check the proposed argument, that is, hypothesis 2. Picture 1, 2, 3 are opposites to hypothesis 1, while picture 4 shows that it is consistent with hypothesis 2. What's more, the picture 5 is the efficiency score of the 3 independent leadership, which proves that the overall effect of leadership is directly proportional to the improvement of patient score, and check that the successful implementation of strategical change is related to cross-level leadership consistency.
I think the issues discussed in this article have an impact on strategic accounting and accountants. The relationship between the coordination of the leadership and the implementation of the new strategy is also an issue that strategic accountants need to consider. Strategic accounting is to formulate and implement a business strategy for enterprises. The consistency of cross-level leadership has a positive impact on the successful implementation of a new strategy and has a great inspiration of the thinking of strategic accountants. As a strategic accountant, leadership is the first step in making and implementing a new strategy. Secondly, we should be able to master the core of leadership and skillfully use the effectiveness of leadership. The problems discussed in this article can help me understand and familiarize myself with leadership and its effectiveness. Making a new strategy often requires only one instruction from the top, but it is complex to develop and extend downwards. It is not the only leader who can affect the effectiveness of organizational performance. However, the factor related to the successful implementation of strategy is the consistency of cross-level leaders. To implement a new strategy, we must first understand the customer's purchase standard and determine the relative importance of each standard. Then collect data, which can show the authenticity of the experiment and can be used as the basis for judging the argument. But using too much data should also be avoided, which will only increase the difficulty of decision making. Leadership has a great impact on the implementation of the strategy, and the effectiveness of leadership is mainly reflected by the effect of the implementation of the new strategy. A phased approach can be used for the implementation of the new strategies. As many strategic plans take time to produce benefits and usually require long-time attention for 3 to 5 years. To implement the new strategy in stages, we must first determine the strategic direction and lay a solid foundation, and allocate the existing tangible resource to support the implementation of the new strategy. Then set goals or KPI, which can more accurately prove whether the implementation of the new strategy under cross-level leadership is effective by whether the goals are achieved or approached. The coordination of leadership affects the implementation of strategic decision, and a strategic management control system is necessary to formulate, plan and implement strategies and continuously measure, analyze and review their success or otherwise of it.
We'll talk about the interpretation of the article and the relevance of the things. There is a close relationship between leadership coordination and the implementation of new strategy. This article introduces how to exert the effectiveness of leadership to increase the possibility of implementing a new strategy, which confirms the importance of leadership in an enterprise. There are two hypotheses proposed for the research analyze on how relationship support for the new strategy affect the performance. Take performance as the valuation criterion for the success of the new strategy. The collected data will analyze using three valuable methods. The research results are completely inconsistent with hypothesis 1. Also, the experimental results have limitations. They relatively support the conjecture of hypothesis 2. It's proved that the second hypothesis, proposed at the beginning of the article, is better than traditional one. To be successful in implementing a new strategic initiative, it is the employment of leadership across hierarchical levels that matter in this case. Next, I will talk about the relevance. This article revolves around the importance of leadership rather its works and how. The article shows the whole process of research for this topic. This article presents the research themes in 3 parts. The part 1 is formulating hypotheses. Part 2 is gathering evidence. Through case study, the success of the new strategy is based on the patient's rating of service. Part 3 is to give a conclusion. alignment of leadership across levels that matter. Last, I will say the positive and the negative for this article. Firstly, for positive, the article helps organizations implementing new strategy more effective to improve performance through research on leadership effectiveness. Next, identify the relationship between leadership alignment and the strategy implementation. How to verify the effectiveness of leadership. A measure can be used to judge the success of the new strategy implementation. Next, learn how to derive statistics for control variable to test the hypothesis, because verifying anything needs to collect data as support. And then for the negative, however, the research in the article has many limitations. The data here are largely cross-sectional, and the inference about the causality cannot be made. And first is the completely small sample size. Can increase the sample size can make the results more reliable and accurate. The second is the nature of the organization study. Different organizations are effective to different degrees by internal and external factors. Third, leadership, about which we know very little. Other actions are ignored that leader may take. The measure itself is likely to represent a conservative tax of a leader's influences. Results may be affected by many factors. The conclusions drawn may not be fair and do not have complete, absolute accuracy.